Understanding dopamine, motivation, and the brain in the modern world. The idea of a dopamine detox has captured the imagination of millions. It promises clarity, focus, discipline, and a return to motivation that many people feel they have lost. According to popular advice, modern life has overstimulated the brain, flooding it with dopamine and destroying our ability to work, focus, or feel satisfied. The proposed solution is simple and extreme. Remove pleasure, remove stimulation, and starve the brain of dopamine so it can reset. But the human brain does not work the way social media advice suggests. To understand whether dopamine detox is real or a myth, we must begin by understanding dopamine itself. Not the internet version of dopamine, but the biological reality. Dopamine is essential to being human. Dopamine is not a harmful chemical. It is not addictive by nature. It is not something the brain needs to eliminate. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger that allows neurons to communicate. It plays a critical role in movement, learning, memory, motivation, curiosity, and decision-making. Without dopamine, basic human functioning collapses. When dopamine is severely reduced, people experience extreme difficulty initiating movement, thinking clearly, or feeling motivated to do anything at all. This is seen in neurological conditions where dopamine-producing neurons are damaged. This alone should challenge the idea that dopamine itself is the enemy. The problem is not dopamine. The problem is how dopamine is stimulated in the modern environment. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. One of the most damaging misconceptions is that dopamine creates pleasure. Dopamine does not produce happiness, satisfaction, or joy. Those feelings come from other systems in the brain. Dopamine's role is to signal importance. It tells the brain that something is worth paying attention to and worth pursuing. Dopamine spikes before action, not after reward. It rises when you anticipate a possible reward, when you are curious, when something feels meaningful or novel. It pushes you forward toward action. This is why dopamine is better understood as the chemical of motivation and anticipation, not pleasure. When people say they are addicted to dopamine, what they're actually describing is a brain trained to seek constant anticipation without meaningful resolution. Why dopamine became a scapegoat? Modern life provides unprecedented levels of stimulation. Never before has the brain been exposed to such frequent novelty, validation, and instant gratification. Every notification, every scroll, every short video, every digital reward. These experiences create rapid dopamine spikes with minimal effort. The brain does not evolve quickly, but it adapts efficiently. When dopamine spikes occur too often, the brain recalibrates its expectations. This adaptation is not damage, it is learning. But the consequences are real. Dopamine downregulation explained simply. When dopamine is stimulated constantly, the brain reduces its sensitivity to dopamine signals. This process is known as downregulation. Downregulation does not mean dopamine is depleted or exhausted. It means dopamine signals have less impact. As a result, activities that once felt interesting or rewarding now feel flat. Effort feels heavier. Motivation feels distant. The brain is not broken. It has adjusted its baseline. This is why people often feel bored, unmotivated, or restless, even when nothing is objectively wrong in their life. Why motivation feels harder than ever? Motivation is not created by force. It emerges when the brain believes effort will be rewarded. In an overstimulated brain, reward prediction becomes distorted. The brain compares everything to its most intense experiences. Normal tasks cannot compete with constant digital novelty. As a result, effort-based activities feel unrewarding, even if they are meaningful in the long term. This creates a dangerous misunderstanding. People believe they have lost discipline or willpower. In reality, their motivation systems have been trained to expect immediate stimulation. The myth of the dopamine detox reset. One of the most popular claims is that abstaining from pleasure for a short period resets dopamine receptors. This is not how the brain works. Dopamine systems do not reset like electronic devices. They adapt gradually based on repeated patterns over time. Short-term deprivation does not undo long-term conditioning. In some cases, extreme restriction can temporarily increase awareness or clarity, but this is often due to reduced stimulation, not a neurological reset. True change requires consistency, not intensity. Why extreme dopamine detox often fails. Many people attempt extreme detoxes. They remove all sources of stimulation and attempt to live in complete austerity. This approach often leads to irritability, anxiety, fatigue, and rebound behavior. The reason is simple. Extreme deprivation activates stress circuits in the brain. Stress suppresses healthy dopamine signaling and reduces cognitive flexibility. The brain interprets extreme restriction as threat. When the detox ends, the brain often seeks stimulation even more intensely than before. This creates cycles of restriction and binging that damage self-trust and increase shame. Dopamine is about effort and progress. The brain responds best to dopamine released through effort and progress, not passive consumption. Effort-based dopamine is slower, steadier, and more satisfying. It comes from learning, exercising, creating, building, and solving problems. Passive dopamine is fast and intense, but short-lived. It comes from consumption without effort. The problem with modern life is not dopamine itself, but the dominance of passive dopamine. When effort-based dopamine is restored, motivation begins to return naturally. Why boredom is a necessary signal. Boredom has been framed as something to escape, but boredom is a critical neurological state. Boredom arises when stimulation drops below a certain threshold. This signals the brain that it is time to generate motivation internally. In boredom, creativity increases, curiosity returns, goals feel more appealing. Constant stimulation prevents boredom and therefore prevents the brain from re-engaging its natural motivation systems. This is why reducing stimulation often leads to renewed interest in simple activities. Not because dopamine disappears, but because it begins to work properly again. Environment shapes dopamine more than discipline. Motivation is not stable across environments. A person may feel highly motivated in one setting and completely unmotivated in another. This does not reflect character. It reflects how the brain responds to context. Calm, predictable environments support dopamine regulation. Chaotic, overstimulating environments weaken it. Changing environment often does more for motivation than trying harder. Sleep and dopamine sensitivity. Sleep is one of the most powerful regulators of dopamine. Poor sleep reduces dopamine receptor sensitivity, making effort feel harder and rewards feel weaker. Many people experiencing low motivation are simply sleep deprived. No detox, habit, or productivity system can override chronic sleep loss. Rest restores dopamine responsiveness. Stress and trauma motivation shutdown. Stress and trauma significantly affect dopamine systems. When the brain perceives danger, it shifts priority from growth to survival. Dopamine signaling decreases because long-term goals feel unsafe. This is why people under chronic stress often feel unmotivated, numb, or stuck. The brain is not failing. It is protecting itself. Motivation returns when safety is restored. Why forcing motivation backfires. Motivation cannot be forced through pressure. Pressure activates threat circuits in the brain. Threat suppresses dopamine signaling. This creates a paradox. The harder you try to force motivation, the more resistance you feel. The brain moves to what feels safe and meaningful, not what feels punishing. What a real dopamine detox actually means. A realistic dopamine detox is not about removing joy or pleasure. It is about reducing excess noise. It means fewer artificial spikes and more intentional engagement. It means creating space for effort-based reward to matter again. This happens gradually, not dramatically. Small changes, big impact. Reducing constant stimulation even slightly can improve dopamine balance. Allowing moments of silence, reducing multitasking. Engaging deeply with one activity at a time.
These changes teach the brain that effort is meaningful again. Dopamine and meaning. Dopamine is deeply connected to meaning. When an action aligns with values or purpose, dopamine signaling becomes more stable and sustainable. This is why people often feel energized when working toward meaningful goals, even when the work is difficult. Meaning amplifies motivation. Science versus myth, clearly defined. The myth says dopamine detox is about punishment and deprivation. Science says dopamine regulation is about balance and environment. The myth promises quick transformation. Science emphasizes gradual adaptation. The myth treats pleasure as the enemy. Science recognizes pleasure as essential when used wisely. Final understanding. You do not need to detox your brain. You need to teach it what is worth effort again. Dopamine is not your enemy. It is your engine. When overstimulated, it loses direction. When respected, it restores motivation, curiosity, and focus. Dopamine does not destroy motivation. Modern environments distort it. Change the environment and the brain adapts. Not through punishment, but through balance.